As Short Swords Season 2 comes to a close, while we wait for Season 3, I've drawn my attention to some other topics, one of them being Toon Turf, specifically Riggy's greatest enemy in Toon Turf. Although Riggy has racked up a number of enemies over the years, none have quite stood out so much as an entire species: penguins. Riggy hates penguins, and he's expressed his opinions on multiple occasions. And what's concerning is that we've been seeing more and more of them recently, especially considering Riggy's commented on there being an entire infestation in Toonville. It makes you wonder, what happened? Why does he hate them? What went wrong? Today, theorists, we're going to be finding out what happened and what makes them his greatest enemy. But before we get into that, please do subscribe. It's free, it helps me make these videos, and you guys get notified every time I post. Truly, it is the best way to support my channel, so if you could, please do check to see if you're subscribed. Thank you, and back to the video. Let's start off with all of the mentions of penguins in the lead up to Toon Turf. If there's one thing we know about them, it's the fact that there's a lot, enough to be considered an entire infestation of them, which makes you wonder, how did the penguins end up in Toonville? Well, a lot of people have pointed out the fact that Toonville is set in a seemingly warmer climate, making it odd for penguins to have such a major presence. Except it's not unlikely, given how many penguin species have adapted to live in warmer climates. Some examples being the Galapagos penguin, the southern rock hopper penguin, and even the little penguin, which resembles the penguins in Toon Turf considering its blue colour. With the sheer amount of them, we can assume that this was either built up through generations or a mass migration. Both cases seem to have their own arguments, given that the penguins definitely have power in the town that can only really be created through years of building those connections. However, terminology like infestation suggests that this was a recent occurrence, so much so that Riggy feels the need to rid Toonville of them. I can see good points being made about either theory. Personally, I'm going with the idea that they've been in Toonville for years. Now let's talk about the penguin. The one who stole Riggy's kidney himself, Squeaker. To understand exactly what we know about Squeaker, then we need to look back at his file. Before we briefly looked over it, but now we can go fully into depth about each piece of information that reveals more about the character. Squeaker often gets lumped together with the other penguins when referring to them, but we know that he was the cause of one of Riggy's greatest fears, having his kidney stolen. In fact, it could be theorised that Squeaker's actions caused Riggy's hatred of the species in the first place, depending on where it lands in the timeline of events. The first thing that draws us in is the steroid use. You heard me. It's the first thing that separates Squeaker from the other penguins, taking him from looking like the rest of them to this insanely buff version that we know him as today. Then the Mafia is also something that is interesting. I feel as though if you've at least watched one Mafia movie, you know to some extent what they'll go to if you cross them. The fact that Squeaker being involved with the Mafia leads to him being in prison and then him stealing Riggy's kidney could imply that Riggy was the one who crossed the Mafia and ended up paying the price with one of his organs. At this point in time, we aren't sure if it's only the penguins in the Mafia, however, it could be that the boss is a penguin, explaining why Riggy's hatred towards them is justified. But we aren't going to assume anything just yet, considering there's not enough evidence to support this point. But it leads us to our next point, Riggy's family. According to his file, he once had a family, but they have been... and that's it. It's blank after that. But judging by the use of past tense, it's not looking too good for them. It's going to be interesting to see who exactly is blackmailing Squeaker here and what happened to his family. But right now, the only suspects for blackmail are Lucky and maybe even Riggy. But that's all just speculation. Then there's the question of how did Squeaker meet Riggy? Originally, the main theory had been that they met in prison, as cellmates, with Squeaker stealing his kidney, initiating the hatred between them. However, the document reports that Squeaker was apprehended and sentenced for a run-in with Riggy. Their first interaction therefore happens outside of the prison, and then it wouldn't make sense for Squeaker to be the one that initiates the conflict. So now the theory is that Riggy was catching wind of the Mafia's activities, and it was him trying to blackmail them. Obviously, they send the muscle of the Mafia to go deal with the issue, which is where the police chief apprehends Squeaker. The reason Riggy doesn't report the incident is because he needs the blackmail. But why? Why would Riggy have to blackmail the Mafia? That seems like quite a risky decision, considering that this is in 2020, a year after Riggy first moves to Toonville and a year after the incident at the factory. It's likely that Riggy's criminal record would have spiraled out of control since then. Having this be a drastic attempt at clearing his name for something he didn't do could be his motivation there, only it may not end up going well with the way he had planned it. But there is an alternative idea of why Squeaker would be seeking revenge on Riggy, and once again, it links back to the factory. Mainly why Riggy was there in the first place. Dano revealed in a livestream that Riggy was there to investigate a drug deal happening there that went wrong. If you're not familiar with the world of organised crime, mafias tend to play a big role in selling illegal products. And while Dano had stated in the series that there's not going to be any real world drugs, there will be substitutes. One that has been brought up a lot would be cotton candy. If we are to believe that the Toonville's mafia is part of the cotton candy trade, then the deal that Riggy was investigating would have been one of theirs. This brings the penguins into the picture much earlier on than we thought, but it's not impossible to have them featured this early. The species is Riggy's greatest enemy, so having this hatred of them be built up over time will need for them to be featured quite early on in order to fully grasp why there's such a strong hatred then, with the ongoing back and forth of Riggy trying to get rid of them for good. But then why? Why can't Riggy get rid of the penguins in Toonville? Well, I think it's because of who they are tied to. I've mentioned before how Lucky holds power in Toonville's council, due to the length they go through to try and protect his image. But those aren't the only ties that Lucky has. He's also involved with the Mafia. Remember how I said that it was likely the Toonville Mafia who set up the deal in Lucky's factory? Well, after the factory had burnt down, Lucky refused to give up any of the tapes, later going on to say that the tapes were burnt in the fire. And why would he say this? Well, the only reason would be to protect the deal going on inside, because he was the one that allowed it to happen. Some people may call this out and say, why was Squeaker in prison then if Lucky has ties to Toonville's legal system? But that's quick to explain. Squeaker holds no real power in the Mafia. He's the muscle. He's the one that would likely get his hands dirty if it came down to it. Toonville only really needs to protect Lucky's image to keep themselves safe, because Lucky's image is Toonville's image. And Lucky would only need to care about keeping the main people in the Mafia out of prison. However, Squeaker is expendable, and there's actually a chance that he was in there on purpose. If we take the theory that the Mafia wanted revenge on Riggy, then they could have pulled some strings and made it so that both Squeaker and Riggy ended up in the same cell. It makes sense. Squeaker was in there on low charges. He was arrested for a run-in with Riggy. In any other case, why would you put them in the same cell? Plus, as far as I'm aware, you're not allowed to have sharp objects in a prison, which would make it really hard to steal someone's kidney. Unless, of course, you had connections. If you had a corrupt police officer turn the other way, if you were able to get secret messages sent to the prison going without review, it wouldn't surprise me if this whole thing was a setup to tell Riggy who not to mess with, making them his greatest enemy. But what do you guys think? Do you think we're on the right track? Remember, feel free to come and tell me your own theories of what will happen. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please do subscribe. It's free and it helps me out a ton. Shout out to my members. You guys have been insane with your support. Thank you guys so much. I truly appreciate it. Side note, just remember what I say here is not confirmed as canon unless proven otherwise. I don't want to mislead people with my theories, so I gather up as much evidence as I can to try and show you why I think this. In the end, they are all just theories. If you want to help me figure out what's true and what's not, then make sure to watch Toon Turf when it releases. Anyway guys, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!